Hi everybody, this is my presentation on emergency management business contingency programs in the private sector. My name is Lishana Walker and I think this is a really interesting topic because this definitely affects all of our favorite businesses like Chick-fil-A, for example. So what is emergency management for business? Basically, this is how businesses attempt to reduce their vulnerability to hazards and to cope with disasters. In a professional environment, a business like Chick-fil-A, for example, has to be concerned with their facility, their employees, and their materials in the event of a natural or technological disaster. A contingency program is the specific strategy a business puts in place to prepare for, respond to, and recover from an emergency. A major component of such a program would be identifying exactly how to protect your assets and how to quickly resume services if they're disrupted. A contingency plan and a continuity plan aren't exactly the same thing. A contingency plan is concerned with preparing and responding to an emergency in its entirety, while a continuity plan is a part of a contingency plan. This part is specific to resuming services if they're disrupted or continuing services during an emergency. For our example, this would be how Chick-fil-A plans to continue serving food as quickly as possible after an emergency or to not stop serving at all. So what would a contingency plan look like for Chick-fil-A or any other private entity, for example? Well, very likely they would begin with a risk identification or vulnerability assessment. This would involve Chick-fil-A looking at the risk to property, risk to the life of their employees, and the risk to the business as a whole. Then there would be a capability and essential services assessment. This would involve looking at what systems are already in place to deal with emergencies. For example, do the employees have regular fire drills? Has their insurance lapsed or is it up to date? And does it have a wide coverage? It would also involve looking at what products and services are essential for the proper function of the business. These would be the first things to be restored or the things they would have to maintain during an emergency. For Chick-fil-A, that might be employees coming in to run the basic services or still being able to access food deliveries, foodstuff deliveries to make the food that they sell every day. They would then have to draft a full emergency response plan. This plan would be looking at things like direction, that is exactly who would be in charge in the event of emergency and what exactly that person's role would be. Communications, this would involve how Chick-fil-A would communicate with its employees and with the public in general, and definitely safety and protection. This would be looking at things in terms of protecting the employees in the event of a disaster, protecting the business itself or the different materials and technology inside. Perhaps if there is a concern for looting or just damage from whatever the disaster may be. Then they would be looking at restoration and recovery. This would be what exactly do they need to get back on track to get the company functioning as it would prior to the disaster. And of course, a very important part of that plan would be training and implementation. It would be essential that not only the managers, but also every Chick-fil-A employee on every level of the hierarchy understand exactly what their role would be during a natural disaster or technological disaster, and how exactly to implement the different roles assigned to them to keep not only themselves, but the business in general safe. It's important that every private business have a business contingency plan. This makes it easier for the business to protect its assets and to protect its employees in the event of an emergency. Additionally, FEMA has guidelines and certification to help businesses develop these plans and strategies that are necessary to keep things flowing smoothly in the event of an emergency. It's also important to remember that having a plan like this is a big part of community resilience. Very often, the people in the community depend on these businesses returning to normalcy as quickly as possible to avoid collective behaviors like milling, for example, and to ensure that people can get back to their everyday lives without major interruption. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys learned something. Have a good day.